Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where we do the work for you by reading the medical education literature. I have here today with me Lara.
Hi, everybody.
Jason.
Hey. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast.
I'm Linda, as you well know, because everybody recognizes my voice. And John has a paper for us today. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Linda. Before we jump in, I want to give a shout out to one of our listeners, Mohammed Zafar Iqbal, who is a research scientist, but also a dad of 3 monsters. Mohammed, I feel you. I see you. I got 3 monsters of my own. Thanks for all the nice things you've been saying to us on the Twitter. Elon hasn't shut any of us down yet, but it's a great way for us to continue that conversation there. I've chosen a paper that I think is going to be interesting in a number of ways. It's a methodology we haven't talked about before. It's a topic that everybody talks about. It's near and dear to my institution's heart, and we'll see what you guys all think. I've titled this episode, Context is Everything, The Challenges of PBL Around the World. And I've gone to a journal that we don't go to all the time, Teaching and Learning in Medicine, and it's by Chan et al. It's Adoption of Problem-Based Learning in Medical Schools in Non-Western Countries, a Systematic Review. So, McMaster University, where I'm on faculty, celebrated its 50th anniversary about 2 years ago. And that milestone was notable for the medical school because McMaster claims to have invented problem-based learning, PBL. Now, PBL's origins are maybe slightly murkier than that. I've written a book chapter just kind of highlighting the history under force of threat from the dean that we had to put something together for the anniversary. So that's how that chapter got wrote. Dear ChatGPT, where were you when I needed you for that one? But there is some kind of origins with PBL, with maybe the Harvard Business School and the case method. Maastricht University deserves a lot of recognition for the psychology of learning that they have imbued into PBL. But for all that we talk about it, it's one of those terms we use routinely. Do we really know what we're talking about? So I would love, what's your definition of PBL, Linda?
So my definition of PBL is where most likely preclinical students are presented with a clinical scenario or some sort of scenario, and they're asked to think about it, work it through, and come up with some questions, and then go away and try and get answers to those questions, come back and do it, at least in my limited experience, in an iterative sort of way. My first exposure to PBL was at Newcastle University in Australia when I went on my first sabbatical. And I was told that they were very happy to have me. I could really do what I wanted, but I had to take a first-year PBL group. So I was learning along with the students, and that was my experience.
Jason, I know where you went to medical school. I went the same place too. What was your lived experience as a student who had to do, air quotes, PBL?
So, as you know, I was a year ahead of you, and we had to endure the first iteration of that school doing PBL. So it was bumpy. So my definition of PBL is med-ed in the 90s. That's sort of like our lived experience. It was like Back to the Future and PBL when they were just in the air. So it's like a small group active learning method that's focused around some sort of context relevant case. And it's still a pretty cool method. It works. It's got lots of, good underlying educational theory underneath it.
Lara, I know that you did some preparatory work, and I'm pretty sure you probably went to the literature. It's hard to make the 3 of us look cool, but you are the nerd. The nerd among nerds. Like,
Wait
let's be
a minute
clear.
now. Okay.
So what's your take on where the PBL literature stands or the rigor or the science behind PBL? When you pull back the curtain, is the wizard there saying, hey, pay no attention?
I think that problem-based learning is one of the innovations and developments in medical education that was really revolutionary. It shook the ground of medical education and encouraged a whole bunch of people to start thinking differently about how you might go about this endeavor. So not only is it really based on sound theory and conceptualization, is it still as functional as some other approaches? Well, that's a debate. But one of the things you have to really respect PBL for is that before PBL and after PBL, there was a paradigm shift in terms of how we think about educating clinicians.
So if you're not familiar with PBL, there is not a one-size-fits-all or a common definition. It's, once again, the problem with the lack of a lingua franca in health professions education. I'm going to use this definition. This is basically the experience that we have at McMaster, which is you organize your curriculum around a clinical, i.e. a patient case, the problem of PBL. You have self-directed learning, so the students can decide how they want to explore and learn over the course of the week as they investigate elements of the problem that's been presented to them. It happens in a small group format, so it's discussion, and you have a facilitator, but not necessarily a content expert for your problem. And then there's some degree of self and peer assessment about how you perform. And that's one version, and there's hundreds of versions and mixes of that when you look past this into the literature. Now, I'm pretty familiar with the literature on PBL from the Western lens. And I got to say, I was intrigued to think, I wonder what this looks like when you take this educational intervention and put it into a different culture. What are some of the underlying assumptions? And so enter Chan et al. They tackle that general problem that's happening as we start to see a globalization of medical education. And they use this lovely term, lift and shift, into a different culture, where the context is not considered and perhaps not accommodated. So this is the purpose from the authors. What are the students' and teachers' experience of PBL approaches in undergraduate medical education programs in non-Western countries? And the methods are a 1-2 punch. I'll walk you through it quick, and then I know Varpio is going to have something to say about something, and I know Jason's going to be confused, so I'll go slow.
Thank you.
First, they did a systematic search, and they looked at the classic databases, PsycInfo, Medline, ERIC, and then they hand-searched the references to make sure they didn't miss anything from what they had. Interestingly, remember, they're talking about PBL in non-Western countries. They had a restriction that said you had to publish in the English language. So that might be a
shocking.
small... I know.
It's a
bit of a non sequitur. And it had to be around medical students. So if you are a health professional that's not a medical student, you're not going to see yourself here. And PBL has been adopted in nursing and rehab, professional training, etc. They did a bit of duplicate for inclusions of about 10%. So they're really trying to make sure that the papers that get in for synthesis, there's some kind of consistency. They then looked at all the articles for quality. They used this CASP, the Critical Appraisal Skills Program checklist. It's a UK-based organization. It has all the fundamental classic kind of questions about, can you trust this data? Are there threats to how it's reported, et cetera? So I don't want to get too into the weeds there, but it's a very standard type of a checklist. And then once they had their papers, they did the synthesis using meta-ethnographic approach. And I want to give you a very quick snapshot, because if I give Varpio the mic, we'll be here for hours, and your jog or your commute can only go for so many minutes. We want to get it in 30.
But it's exciting.
It's a really cool synthetic method. I got to say, I really like it. And it's laborious and intensive. But I think you get from it a really interesting way of assembling the literature. Here's the snapshot version for the Emerge Doc Brain. What you do is you identify key concepts, themes, and you need to support them by first order constructs, the actual raw data that comes from the paper. But as an author, you start to build these second order constructs that really reflect your interpretation of that primary data. And then when you have these key concepts laid out, and you can juxtapose them from across papers, which are common, what are different, where are they in conflict, you build this third order construct that talks about the relationships of all these concepts across the literature. And that's where you see the meta part. That's where you start to see the connection of, rather than just reporting what you see, which is what we often read in the synthesis, what a meta-ethnographic type of methodology does, it allows you to see how all the data interconnects, where there is alignment, where there is conflict, and where there's other layers on top of everything. The final part, I guess, just around the methods is the reflexivity statement, where the authors say they are based in a single Western country. It's the UK, but they have some personal and some educational experience from Southeast Asia. So again, I'll just flag those two little bits about English language restriction and their own positionality as being educators and clinicians and scholars from the West. So with that, I'll let Jason, Linda, Lara jump in with critiques or further kind of insights around methods.
So I am not a master of their analytic method. Their systematic review, like just nicely laid out in this paper. You can follow along. You can see how they use Prisma. And, CASP is not one I use. It's very positivist when I went and looked it up. And I thought these guys get full kudos for accessibility for their methods. They're very systematic. You can follow their logic. I wonder about some threats to validity, but I'll leave space for Professor Varpio to pick on those.
Linda?
Agreed. Jason, I had no major problems with it, with the exception of where the authors come from.
So then, first, Jason, tell me, what were your concerns about threats to validity? What were your
So the two obvious ones were, in their search, they limited to English and med students.
Yeah.
Which I think, based on their goal, doesn't make sense to me. And then the rest is the intersectionality that we've all mentioned. Which this should have been co-constructed with somebody living in the environment they're talking about.
Okay, so I am, in terms of the co-construction point, I think there's a point there. It would have been really powerful to have somebody from that community, from that geographical space. Never mind powerful, like those observations, those insights would have created been really important to add to the paper for sure. In terms of the concerns about English language, I hear what you're saying, but part of me is also of the opinion that, I would like to think that we can do powerful research of the literature that's available that we can access in our own language. So I'd like to think that they have, that's not a concern. John, did you want to jump in on that, or? No, John just pressed his mute button. Never mind. Thought you were trying to say something. Okay. So meta-ethnography, can't say enough things about it. Love meta-ethnography. It's a knowledge synthesis approach. It's an approach for synthesizing qualitative data. So it's only for qualitative data. So you might have lost some self-report survey answers and those sorts of things, but it's the price you pay. I don't have any problem with that. I was a little concerned that perhaps the orientation of the research, I would have really appreciated a flag from the authors about their paradigmatic orientation, so I know that because meta-ethnography sits quite firmly in that subjectivist orientation. So I'm a little concerned there was a bit of a objectivist orientation that's leading behind it. But so I would really have appreciated that. I do have a bit of a request for our community, for our readers, because I found myself going down a rabbit hole with this paper, because these authors talked about snowballing, right, to find articles. So what they did is they looked for articles that had cited, they found key articles and looked for articles that had cited those key articles that were about the same topic. And they looked in the reference section of key articles to see who was referenced therein for additional articles to add, right? And so, of course, this got me remembering that great conversation we had recently about pearl growing and whether or not that was the same thing. And then I also found myself looking up the term hand searching, and just as an FYI to you three, they're not all the same and they mean different things. And then I got really confused. So if there's a librarian listening, would you please send us an email, thepaperspodcast.com, and help me figure out the difference to distinguish between snowballing, pearl growing, and hand searching. I would really appreciate that.
Are you still offended that I call you a super nerd after that question?
No, it's a cape I can wear. I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Don't trip over it because you're a super nerd. Coordination.
I will, and I have. But
okay.
That's awesome.
I'll leave. This is a little shameless plug. If you go to paperspodcast.com, that's our website. You can find the abstract for this episode, and I've left a reference to what I think is a really nice guide to meta-ethnography. It's by Sitar et al. And so there's a link there. It's an open access article, so there's no paywall. You can get at it. And it breaks it down within the context of healthcare research, and it has a worked example. And so you can actually see, here's all the steps that you go through. Because you can't go to a Wikipedia page and say, what's meta-ethnography?
No.
You will be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And you will not appreciate the nuance and the elegance that goes into the synthesis when you use this type of approach.
You know what, John? I'll send you a link to a website called litterx.com that has a collection of all different kinds of literature reviews as knowledge syntheses. Again, it's based on that JGME series, but it's all in one place. So I'll send you that tag as well. We can post it. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get to the results. From a little over 1,000 manuscripts, they included 41. All of them met that minimum quality benchmark. So we're not looking at GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. The manuscripts were informed by data from more than 5,000 students, more than 350 facilitators in 18 different countries from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. They decided that 6 of the 41 papers were a key paper, which is important when you start to think about building those third-order constructs. And so what they find is that there's 3 third-order constructs that show connectivity and relationship across these 41 papers, but certainly anchoring off those 6 key papers. The one is the skill of the tutor. One is organization and planning, so the actual design and mechanics of the curriculum. And the last is student engagement. And they have this lovely figure 2, which takes a lot of complex text and helps you see the connectivity. And I think here's where a picture really is worth 1,000 words. And so there's a version of this graphic in the abstract. One more plug to go to paperspodcast.com. And what you can find is that there's overlap. So if you have the appropriate facilitation skills, then you're going to have an organization for your curriculum that works. If you don't have the technology, so you lack Wi-Fi, or you don't have a pedagogical philosophy, then you won't find a way in to either having the philosophy or the technical requirements necessary for it. And the points, there's so much here that, we could get really stuck into, but the points that really stuck out for me, particularly when we think about a lift and shift, is that PBL, from a student engagement point of view, assumes that critique and that ongoing debate and a willingness to be okay with a lack of certainty and a willingness to express it might not be operationalized effectively in cultures where that is of the norm or that is permitted. And that the assumption of a flat power hierarchy may not also be the same in all these various cultures around the world. And so the unspoken assumptions about where PBL originates from in terms of its curriculum design may in fact make it not a natural way to just simply drop it into a culture unchanged or unthoughtfully modified to make it work. And so you can think about language of instruction. If there's a requirement for language of instruction to be in a language that's not reflected in local culture, so perhaps using English, and which might be a second, not a first language for a student or for an instructor, the facility or the nuance or the ability to work off script and spontaneously might inhibit it. You could imagine that if feedback, both for student engagement and tutor skills, is something that is challenging or not built into that culture, then how you can effectively function as a tutor or how you can effectively function as a student might be problematic. And so there's all these cultural pieces that we don't consider. We just say, hey, you have a case, you do a small group, you give self-directed learning, and then you get some peer assessment to come back. How bad could that be? But it all is predicated on what's the cultural norms and where you're practicing it. And so, with that, I'm wondering, Lara, Linda, Jason, what was your take-homes from this meta-ethnographic synthesis?
So for me, John, this paper is the perfect illustration and argument of why we need to think about writing innovations using the layered analysis approach that was published by Anna Cianciolo and Glenn Regehr back in 2019, where they talk about focusing less about the techniques, what you did in the classroom, and more about the principles and philosophies that underpin them. Because those philosophies and principles, which are the why, you had them sit in small groups. Okay, why? The why answer is the principle. It's because this intervention relies on student engagement and discussion participation. And once you start to focus on those principles and those philosophies, that's what you need to know are those transferable to my space? And if they're not transferable, then that innovation is going to have a really hard time being successful in the new space. So this paper illustrates the need for us to think about writing innovations using that layered analysis approach so very well. I could go on and on. I know that I talk too much, so I won't. But this really is one of those papers that for me, I'm going to take this as one of those, as an example of why you can't write innovations the old way.
That's a really good point. I think this is a paper that reminds us that our literature is too North American and European, that we're missing all of these perspectives that could make us all better. So I think what I took from this paper, this is about our field, not necessarily about PBL per se. PBL is the kind of where the spotlight is as a payload. This is about our field. This is about how all the missing voices, apropos to all the work that Lauren Maggio and her group with Tony Artino and so on are looking at in bibliometrics.
And I've got to say, when I read this, I thought about student engagement, started to think about my sabbaticals in Japan and how hard it was to get students, anybody who was basically lower than you on the food chain, how hard it was to get them to engage. And I somehow can't see, they would be very happy to engage with themselves, but as soon as you put somebody who was considered higher than them, forget it, they'd shut up.
Well, let me go to how the authors conclude their paper, and then we'll go to our round of votes. And I'm just going to quote the authors because I think they say it better than anything I could, which is, this study highlights how PBL implementation in a non-Western setting requires institutions to make significant modifications to ensure students engage with PBL methods while respecting cultural variations and interests. Medical education leaders and policymakers in non-Western countries should be cognizant of the fact that PBL does not lift and shift outside of the Western context in which it was developed, and should adjust their adoption strategies accordingly. So, thank goodness I'm not doing any more soliloquies tonight. How many words did I stumble over as I just read a page?
It's getting late.
It is getting late. With that, let's go to our round of votes. 1 to 5 in terms of the methods. Lara, Linda, Jason.
I'm going to give this paper a 3. There are some concerns I have around alignment of paradigms and those sorts of things, and some moments where I had a little bit of concern, but relative middle of the pack. Yeah, 3.
I'll agree. 3, nothing special. Some concerns also about who was actually doing the research and why they didn't bring in some more people from the non-European, non-Western environment.
I agree. It's a 3 for the reasons said.
I'm going to be a little bit more charitable. I'm going to give it a 4. I think they did a lot of work, and I think they were really systematic. I think we're nitpicking on some smaller pieces to bring it into the middle of the pack, but I think they did well. Now, what does this speak to you in terms of educational impact? Is this something that you share? Is this something that you say, I've lost 30 minutes of my life. I can't believe Sherbino made me read it. We'll go reverse order.
Not sure what the impact of this. Would I use this? I'd use this as an example of the need for more diverse voices in our field, but nothing else. And so 3.
I'll give it a 3. Similar reasons, but also I was tempted to give it a 4. I mean, they started out with 5,000 papers, and anybody should get an extra point just for that.
I'm giving it a 4 because it really is an illustration for me to give to someone to say, I understand you want to write up your innovation, but and I understand why you wrote it in this way we used to do it, but you have to read this to understand why you need to write them differently. So for me, it's a 4.
I can give it a 4 too.
A 4?
No, a 4 also.
For me, if you are in...
Or a 2.
4 as well. I'm going to give it a 4 as well.
I thought it was a 4.2, and I was so happy for you. I was like, welcome to the dark side, Luke.
I want to give it a 2-4.
That was a 2-4, yeah. I thought, okay, it's giving them a case of beer.
Right, yeah.
For me, it serves 2 purposes. One, if you are involved in undergraduate health professional education, you're touching PBL almost certainly somewhere in your curriculum. And here's a reminder about understanding what the heck do we actually mean when we say PBL, and a reminder that even though we think we have something concrete and very discrete, there are lots of philosophies that might not be spoken of, and when you change culture and context, the effectiveness or the implementation, or why didn't it work for us? Why can't we see transfer? Will be a question that this manuscript highlights for us. So there you have it. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at our website, paperspodcast.com. You can get us on the social. You can, I don't know, how else can they reach us?
Come to Amy.
Oh,
you can come to Amy.
Are you trying to say something, Jason? Your mic's off.
Yeah, I think he is, but he's muted because his technology grasp of technology is very poor.
I was just commenting on John's accent. It keeps on like changing geographically. It was the podcast, and then he moved on to something else. I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to do my groundskeeper Willie yet, but I'm too tired. But it's coming for when I see it, Amy. With that, thanks so much to everybody for listening.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Just before we go, we want to remind you that the 4 of us are trying to sneak onto a plane because we can't get there by train to the AMI 2023 conference. It's in Glasgow in August. See how I went really fast over that?
No, I don't think it's Glasgow. I don't think so.
You're distracted from my message.
Purposive?
Yeah.
Purposive.
Never mind. Professor Schumacher really went to town over the word composite, which is a well-known ClinEpi word, composite outcome.
As opposed to composite?
What do you think it is?
And he insists composite. And then we went to dinner, and that's all he said for about an hour is composite.
Maybe he was talking about the food.
I don't know. Anyway, so back to my main message, which is we're going to be in Scotland. I'm not going to say the city anymore. PTSD. We're all going to sneak onto a plane. We're going to get to Scotland for the AMI conference. And somewhere, some evening, we're going to be doing a broadcast, a live one that you can be a part of. You too can heckle my fellow hosts for all of their strange quirks, whether purposive or accidental. And you can see what John's wearing.
You can do it separately or in composite.
No, it's composite. It's totally composite. I don't know what composite.
I know that.
It doesn't work, right? Yeah.
I know that.
Tell that to Professor Schumacher. He insists. I think he was just confusing me. And we want you to be there. So look forward to seeing you then.
And then once you get there, we'll not only have you pronounce that city we're in, Glasgow, but we'll have you pronounce the other city. Jason, can you use the other city, the one with the castle?
Edinburgh.
What?
Edinburgh.
Isn't that a thing that gets stuck to the dog's fur?
It's cold. It's Edinburgh. That's why they named it that way. It's cold.
I'll see you in Edinburgh.
Exactly.
Good night.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.